Welcome back, AQR students, to second semester. We're starting off this semester with a unit on statistics. So we'll be looking at this particular, at least parts of this unit are lots of words and process more than necessarily arithmetic or math in the traditional sense that we think of it. We will have some of that, but there's a lot of how do we conduct statistical studies? How do we work against bias in statistical studies? How do we decide whether something's a good study or not? What's a good question to ask in a statistical study? All sorts of things like that. So that's the situation. And here we go. Our first student activity sheet is long. We'll be spending at least 3 days on it, at least today and tomorrow and Friday on it. So don't worry that, if you see it and it looks really long, it's not just, we're not going to be doing all that today. All right, here we go. Hey there, AQR students. We're starting off the year here, the new semester, with a unit on statistics. So in this first part, we're looking at statistical investigations. And we're kind of looking at statistics overall in general and some different things with that. So this first student activity sheet 1 is overview of purpose, design, and studies, kind of an overview of statistical studies. It's a long packet. We'll be spending the rest of this week on it at least Wednesday, Thursday, Friday on it. So here we go. Music is a large part of many people's lives. Because of this, it is often the subject of study. For example, music industry executives want to know what will be popular with different age groups. That's one sort of thing. Advertisers want to know which radio stations are the most popular. Doctors want to know how much hearing damage results from loud music. Teachers want to know whether or not listening to classical music helps students perform better on tests. Statistical investigations are used every day for a variety of reasons. So what are the purposes of statistical investigations? Give some example of statistical investigations with which you are familiar. All right? So just think about, I'll put this into the evaluation at the end of the lesson for your grade, but just think about why there are statistical investigations and what are some examples of things that you are familiar with. All right? And there's all sorts of different statistical investigations in our culture, in our society. Okay? The more specific you can be, the better. All right. So we'll be talking about the research cycle quite a bit here. So here's our first introduction to the research cycle. We've got this circular thing going on here. This graphic illustrates the process of planning and implementing a statistical investigation. First, a question or series of questions, up here, a question, sparks the interest of a researcher. The research team then decides on the best design, second step, design, for investigating the question. Number 2, the graph shows no obvious ending point or starting point. So what does this mean? Does it mean we can start anywhere we want and just keep on going around the circle? I don't think so, because obviously I think that you start with a question. In fact, they just said that. First a question, right? So we're going to obviously start here. We design an experiment. We collect some data about that experiment, some sort of data. We analyze that data that we've collected, and then we come up with some sort of report. We make conclusions from our analysis. All right? So how does that lead back? And I think that's going to be a question that comes up later. So think about that. All right, so we have 2 different types of statistical investigations. First example, radio rating services sometimes collect data on listenership by asking participants to record the date, time, and station each time they listen to the radio. Other rating services distribute monitoring devices that automatically record this information anytime the participant has the radio turned on. Still others call participants and ask them about their listening habits. The data are then compiled so that advertisers know which stations are the most popular at specific times during the day. So this is all radio stuff. I'm not sure they still do this or not. But anyway, each of these approaches is an example of an observational study which collects data about some characteristic of the population. The data can be collected by observation, by a survey or interview, or by other means. Okay, so describe an observational study in your own words. So put it in your own words, not in someone else's words. Don't Google it, but just come up with what are we talking about here? An observational study is research in which, finish that statement, all right? That's going to be part of your assessment here. Example 2. 17-year-old student designed a science fair project with 72 mice randomly assigned to 3 groups. The 3 groups were hard rock music, Mozart, and no music at all, called a control group. And we will be talking more about control groups. The mice in the first 2 groups were exposed to music 10 hours a day, 3 times a week. All of the groups were timed as they ran through a maze. An analysis of results showed that the 24 mice in the no music group averaged about a 5-minute improvement in their maze completion time, while the Mozart mice improved 8.5 minutes. The hard rock mice actually got slower, an average of 4 times slower. And another interesting fact, the student had to start his experiment over because all the hard rock mice killed each other. None of the classical mice did that. And I did look at this website, and yeah, this is a real thing. Okay? This is an example of an experimental study. Experimental versus observational. Observational up above, now experimental. In an experimental study, the researcher separates the participants into 1 or more groups and applies some sort of treatment. After treatment, the variable of interest is measured and the results are compared. So what are the treatment and the variable of interest in this case? I'm going to pause this, let you answer that, and then we'll come back. All right, so the treatment is, in this particular case, treatment is the type of music. Hard rock, Mozart, or nothing at all. And the variable of interest, what they're looking at, what they're measuring is time running the maze. Okay, so describe, I'll put this in your assessment, describe an experimental study in your own words. An experimental study is research in which, finish that statement. All right, observational and experimental studies have many components that must be planned, such as sampling and data collection procedures. Then the data must be collected, the results analyzed, and the conclusions reported. Referring back to the research cycle graphic, why is there an arrow after the report box? All right, this is what I was talking about earlier. It goes question, design, collect, analyze, report. Why is there an arrow here? I'm going to put that in the assessment as well. What do you think about that? All right. Okay, so this potato chip thing that we're coming up on next, this is going to follow us throughout this, at least this lesson. Okay, it'll come up over and over here. What about the question box? Consider this situation. This unopened bag of chips is half empty. You've probably come across this. You buy a bag of chips and it seems half empty. I wonder if it really contains 28.3 grams as the package says. This type of informal question or observation is the beginning of many investigations. Informal questions can turn into more formal problem statements or research questions. For example, you may decide to investigate whether there is a scandal in the potato chip industry by checking the following. Do Spud potato chips contain an average of 28.3 grams of chips per bag? Okay. We're going to skip over number 7 for right now and look at number 8. And we'll stop with number 8 here. Suppose you conduct the investigation into Spud potato chips and find that the mean weight of the chips in your sample is 25 grams rather than 28.3 grams. All right? So we say X bar here, X with this bar above it, X with the line over it, we call that X bar is 25 grams. Do you think a difference of 3.3 grams between the actual and advertised weights is large enough that it needs to be reported? It's a difference of 3.3 grams large enough that it needs to be reported. If so, how do you report this information and to whom? So 2 questions there. Is it large enough to be reported? And if you're going to report it, who are you going to go to? All right? So again, I'm going to leave that for the assessment. That'll be it for today. We'll pick it up here tomorrow. All right? Bye-bye.